In 1991, something happened that most people thought was impossible. A superpower collapsed, not in a blaze of nuclear fire, not from an invading army, but from within. For nearly half a century, the world had been split down the middle. On one side, the United States. On the other, the Soviet Union. Two giants, two massive nuclear arsenals, two completely different visions for the future of humanity. And then, almost overnight, one of them just disappeared. How does a global superpower, a nation that rivaled America at every turn, simply unravel without a single shot fired at its capital? To understand how the Soviet Union fell, you first have to understand what it was. Formed in 1922 after the Russian Revolution, the USSR wasn't just a country. It was an idea, a communist system built on total state control and central planning. The government owned everything. No private property, no major private industries. And for decades, it seemed to work. The Soviet Union industrialized at a stunning speed. It was the nation that defeated Nazi Germany in World War II. It launched the first satellite, Sputnik, into space, kicking off the space race. It became the only nation on Earth powerful enough to challenge the United States. This rivalry defined the Cold War. It led to proxy wars in Vietnam and Korea, a terrifying nuclear arms race, and a global chess match of espionage. Back in America, the threat felt incredibly real. Kids practiced duck and cover drills in school, preparing for a nuclear attack that felt like it could come at any moment. On the surface, with its thousands of nuclear weapons, its massive army, and its control over all of Eastern Europe, the Soviet Union looked unstoppable. But underneath that iron facade, deep cracks were forming. The Soviet economy was incredibly rigid. Unlike America's free market, everything was decided by a central committee. The government told factories how many shoes to make, how much grain to grow, how many cars to build. This system crushed innovation. It was massively inefficient. By the 1970s and 80s, the cracks were becoming impossible to ignore. Store shelves were often empty. People stood in long lines for basic goods like bread and toilet paper. And a quiet, creeping corruption was spreading through every level of the system. Then came the war in Afghanistan. In 1979, the Soviet Union invaded, expecting a quick and easy victory. Instead, it became their Vietnam. The war dragged on for a decade, draining the treasury, costing thousands of lives, and shattering morale back home. At the same time, the United States, under President Ronald Reagan, turned up the heat. America ramped up its defense spending. Reagan famously called the Soviet Union an evil empire and announced the Strategic Defense Initiative, a futuristic missile defense system nicknamed Star Wars. The message was crystal clear. America's economy could afford another arms race. Could the Soviet Union's? By the mid-1980s, the answer was obvious. No, the system was breaking. And that's when a new leader rose to power in 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev. He was younger, a reformer, and he knew the country was on the brink of collapse. Gorbachev introduced two radical policies that would change the world. The first was perestroika, or restructuring, aimed at reforming the dying economy. The second was glasnost, which meant openness. He wanted to modernize the Soviet Union, make it more transparent, and allow for some limited market reforms. But an incredible thing happened. Glasnost, the policy of openness, worked a little too well. Once people were allowed to speak freely, they didn't stop. Criticism of the government, once whispered in secret, was now shouted in public. Journalists began exposing the dark secrets of the past, like the brutal purges under Stalin. For decades, fear was the glue that held the Soviet Union together. Now, that fear was fading. Inspired by this new openness, countries across Eastern Europe that were under Soviet control began to push for their own freedom. Then, in 1989, the unthinkable happened. The Berlin Wall, the ultimate symbol of the Cold War, came down. Communist governments across Eastern Europe fell one after another, like dominoes. And the Soviet Union, surprisingly, chose not to send in the tanks. That decision sealed its fate. Inside the Soviet Union itself, the fire of independence was spreading. Republics like Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Ukraine, and Georgia began demanding to leave the Union. The giant was fracturing from the inside out. The final act came in August of 1991. A group of hardline communists, furious with Gorbachev's reforms, attempted a coup. They wanted to turn back the clock and restore strict, old-school control. Tanks rolled into the streets of Moscow. For a terrifying moment, it looked like the iron fist might crush the new freedoms. But then, the people of Moscow poured into the streets to defend their democracy. One man, Boris Yeltsin, climbed on top of a tank and fiercely condemned the coup. That image became iconic, a symbol of defiance. The coup failed in just 3 days. But the damage was done. The authority of the Communist Party was completely shattered. One by one, the remaining republics declared their independence. By December 1991, the Soviet Union as a political entity had ceased to exist. On December 25th, Christmas Day, Mikhail Gorbachev resigned as president. That night, the red Soviet flag with its hammer and sickle was lowered from the Kremlin for the very last time. In its place, the flag of the new Russian Federation was raised. A superpower had died. Not with a bang, but with a quiet resignation speech. For people in the West, it felt surreal. For generations, the Soviet Union was the enemy. It was the other half of the global equation. And suddenly, it was just gone. The Cold War was over. The United States stood alone as the world's sole superpower. But for the millions of people who actually lived in the former Soviet Union, this wasn't a moment of pure celebration. It was chaos. The economy went into freefall. Hyperinflation wiped out life savings overnight. State-owned industries were sold off, often falling into the hands of a new class of ultra-wealthy oligarchs. Crime skyrocketed. Poverty spread like a disease. In the 1990s, life expectancy in Russia actually dropped. An entire empire had dissolved, and millions of ordinary people were left to pick up the pieces. Today, historians still debate the exact cause of the collapse. Was it the broken economy? The years of political repression? The crippling arms race with America? Was it internal corruption? Or was it something deeper? A rigid system that was simply incapable of adapting to a changing world. The Soviet Union wasn't defeated by an invasion. It wasn't destroyed in a war. It was hollowed out by its own internal weaknesses. And when reform finally came, it was too little, too late. There's a powerful lesson in this story that still resonates today. Superpowers can feel permanent. Their dominance can feel inevitable. But history shows us that's never true. Empires rise, and empires fall. The Soviet Union controlled nearly a sixth of the planet's land. It shaped global politics for 70 years. It had enough nuclear weapons to end human civilization. And yet, it unraveled in less than a year. True power isn't just about the size of your army. It's about adaptability. It's about public trust. It's about economic resilience and the confidence of your own people. When those foundations begin to crack, even the mightiest systems can crumble. Today, we see tensions rising once again, and the legacy of the Soviet collapse continues to shape our world. But the story of the USSR remains a stark reminder: no nation is immortal. It is a moment in history, and all moments, eventually, pass. So the question isn't just about how the Soviet Union collapsed. The deeper question we should ask ourselves is this: what truly keeps a nation strong? Is it just military might and economic dominance? Or is it something more fragile, something that can't be measured in missiles or GDP? Because if the 20th century taught us anything, it's that even giants can fall. And when they do, the world is never the same. Thanks for watching.